In 2000, AMD walked into the European Commission's offices in Brussels and filed a complaint. They said Intel was paying computer manufacturers to pretend AMD didn't exist. Intel called it standard business. Discounts for volume, nothing unusual. The European Commission disagreed. By 1.06 billion euros. I break down Europe's biggest corporate fines every week. Subscribe if you want to understand how billion-euro punishments actually work. In 2 quarters of 2006, Dell received more money from Intel's loyalty payments than Dell earned from selling computers. That's worth repeating. A company that built and shipped millions of personal computers made more profit from not buying a competitor's chips than from its entire hardware business. Between 2002 and 2007, Intel paid Dell approximately $6 billion in rebate payments. The premise was simple. Buy all or almost all of your processors from Intel, and the money flows. Consider AMD, and it vanishes. Dell chose the money. For 5 straight years, Dell used 0 AMD processors. Not a single chip. The world's largest PC manufacturer ran entirely on Intel silicon. Not because Intel made the best product, but because Intel made the best offer. Hewlett-Packard had a cap. Intel required HP to purchase at least 95% of its business desktop processors from Intel, 5% for AMD. An internal HP email from July 2002 spelled it out. Quote, "Please do not communicate to the regions, your team members, or AMD that we are constrained to 5% AMD by pursuing the Intel agreement." End quote. The cap was real. The secrecy was mandatory. HP's entire business desktop division was effectively an Intel exclusive, and nobody outside the negotiating room was supposed to know why. Lenovo signed a memorandum of understanding with similar exclusivity conditions. NAC received conditional rebates from October 2002 through November 2005. Every major computer manufacturer on the planet was locked into the same invisible arrangement. Buy Intel, get paid. Think about AMD, lose everything. But rebates were only half of Intel's strategy. Intel made direct payments to manufacturers to delay, cancel, or restrict AMD products. The Commission called these naked restrictions because they weren't tied to volume or loyalty at all. They were payments for specific acts of sabotage. Intel paid HP to push AMD computers only toward less strategic customers and to accept a 6-month delay in marketing AMD machines in certain regions. Intel paid Acer to postpone the launch of an AMD-based notebook. Intel paid Lenovo to stop launching AMD notebooks entirely in 2006. And Intel paid Media Saturn, Europe's largest computer retailer, to sell exclusively Intel-based machines. The biggest PC chain on the continent, and AMD was banned from its shelves entirely. Not because AMD's products were inferior. AMD's Optimum chips outperformed Intel's Pentium 4 and Xeon processors in independent benchmarks during this exact period. The technology was better, the price was lower, reviewers recommended AMD, but customers walking into MediaMarkt in Berlin or Munich or Vienna never saw an AMD option on the shelf. Intel's checkbook had cleared the aisle. The best chip on the market couldn't compete with $6 billion in loyalty payments. AMD's market share tells the rest. Before 2002, AMD held between 15 and 20% of the global processor market. During the rebate years, despite launching processors that won technical awards and outperformed Intel in server workloads, that share froze in place. HP was capped at 5%, Dell used 0, Lenovo delayed launches indefinitely. The entire competitive landscape wasn't shaped by engineering, it was shaped by a checkbook. Intel spent 5 years paying the world's largest manufacturers to ignore a better product. 5 years of emails, contracts, and conditional payments building a wall around the processor market. Then someone showed up unannounced. In July 2005, European Commission investigators arrived at Intel's Munich office at 9 in the morning. Simultaneously, raids hit Media Saturn headquarters in Germany and DSG International in the United Kingdom, including a retail support center in Hemel Hempstead. The investigators carried inspection decisions specifying exactly what they wanted: rebate agreements, conditional payments, evidence of exclusionary dealing with Dell, HP, Lenovo, and NEC. Forensic IT teams used portable imaging stations and write blockers to copy hard drives, generating SHA-256 hash values to ensure nothing could be altered after the fact. They ran keyword searches through Nuix's forensic software, sifting through thousands of internal emails, presentations, and confidential communications between Intel and its manufacturing partners. They found what AMD had alleged all along: internal Intel communications showing rebate levels were explicitly conditional on exclusivity, emails Intel had generally tried to conceal. 4 years of investigation followed. On July 26, 2007, the Commission issued a statement of objections against Intel. A supplementary statement came in July 2008. Intel argued at every stage that its rebates were legal volume discounts available to any customer. The Commission disagreed at every single stage. On May 13, 2009, Commissioner Neelie Kroes stood at a podium in the Berlaymont building and announced the largest antitrust fine ever imposed on a single company, 1.06 billion euros. She said, quote, "Intel has harmed millions of European consumers by deliberately acting to keep competitors out of the market for computer chips for many years," end quote. The largest antitrust fine in European history for paying people not to shop around. Intel's CEO Paul Otellini responded the same day, quote, "There has been absolutely zero harm to consumers. Intel never stopped AMD from selling its products anywhere in the world," end quote. He called the rebates standard practice, perfectly legal, the kind of discounts any company offers its best customers. The Commission had the internal emails that said otherwise. Intel appealed. In June 2014, 5 years after the original fine, the General Court in Luxembourg upheld the decision in full. The court agreed the rebates were abusive. The 1.06 billion euro fine stood. But the legal machinery was far from finished. Intel appealed again, this time to Europe's highest court. In September 2017, the Grand Chamber of the Court of Justice overturned the General Court's judgment. The highest court in Europe said the lower court had made a legal error. It hadn't examined whether the rebates were actually capable of restricting competition using proper economic analysis. It hadn't considered Intel's evidence that an equally efficient competitor could have matched the rebates. The case went back for a second look. In January 2022, the General Court delivered a shock. It annulled the 1.06 billion euro fine entirely. The court found the Commission's economic analysis incomplete. Quote, "The analysis carried out by the Commission does not make it possible to establish to the requisite legal standard that the rebates at issue were capable of having anti-competitive effects," end quote. 13 years after the original decision, the fine was gone. But the court confirmed one thing. Intel's naked restrictions, the direct payments to delay and cancel AMD products, were illegal. The problem was narrower. Nobody could determine what portion of the original fine applied to those restrictions alone, so the Commission recalculated. In September 2023, it reimposed a fine of 376.36 million euros only for the naked restrictions, only for the payments to HP, Acer and Lenovo to halt AMD products between November 2002 and December 2006. In October 2024, the European Court of Justice upheld that fine as final. A company that spent billions paying manufacturers to ignore its competitor ended up paying 376 million for the privilege. And here's where the math gets genuinely absurd. Because the original 1.06 billion euro fine was annulled, the Commission owed Intel interest on the money it had held for over a decade. Intel received 515.55 million euros back in interest payments. The final fine for the naked restrictions was 376 million. The interest payment Intel received was 515 million. A company fined for anti-competitive behavior earned a net profit from the regulator that fined it. Intel made money on this case. 24 years passed between AMD's original complaint and the final Court of Justice ruling in 2024. The case outlasted 3 competition commissioners, 2 Intel CEOs, and the entire era of desktop computing that sparked the original dispute. AMD's CEO Hector Ruiz, who filed that complaint in 2000, left the company in 2008. His successor negotiated a separate $1.25 billion settlement with Intel in 2009. By the time European courts finished arguing about processor rebates from 2003, the world had moved to smartphones, cloud computing, and artificial intelligence chips. The market Intel fought so desperately to monopolize had become almost irrelevant to the future of technology. Intel spent 24 years fighting a €1 billion fine for paying people not to buy AMD chips. In the end, the regulators paid Intel more than Intel paid them. Like winning a lawsuit, you lost. Next week, 5 car makers agreed to limit how well their emissions systems worked. Not because the technology failed, because making it work properly cost more than getting caught. They miscalculated. By €875 million,